She called her father with 3 words and no explanation. He drove 11 minutes in 7. What he found in that gymnasium, and what he built in the weeks that followed, is the kind of story most people never believe is real. Daniel Reeves had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous moments in life don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, wearing ordinary clothes on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. He was on his back underneath a breaker panel in a half-finished office building on the east side of Harlow Creek, Ohio, when his phone buzzed against the concrete floor. He almost ignored it. The job was almost done, and he needed the money, needed it more than he wanted to admit. Since the cedar mill contract had fallen through last month, for reasons nobody would explain to his face. He wiped his hands on his work pants and looked at the screen. Unknown number. He answered anyway, because Daniel Reeves had spent 10 years as a SWAT officer learning that unknown was never the same as unimportant. The voice on the other end was young, barely controlled, the kind of voice that was trying very hard not to shatter. "Sir, this is Maya. I go to school with Chloe. She needs you right now. The auxiliary gym. Please don't call the police first." The call lasted 18 seconds. Daniel was on his feet in 3. Rex was in the back of the truck, a 4-year-old German Shepherd with a retired K9 badge and a slight limp in his left rear leg that never once slowed him down when it mattered. The dog lifted his head the moment Daniel opened the door, reading something in the set of his shoulders that no human in that parking lot could have seen. Daniel drove 7 minutes through Harlow Creek's afternoon traffic, cutting through lights he would never have run on any other day. Jaw tight, hands steady on the wheel, the way they'd been steady through every high-risk entry he'd ever made. The way his whole body went still and focused when something real was happening. He didn't know yet what he would find. He knew it was real. Rex pressed his nose against the window and watched the road. What Daniel found in the auxiliary gym took him exactly 2 seconds to understand, and would take months to stop seeing when he closed his eyes. Tyler Marsh, 18 years old, built like someone who had never been told no by a single person in his life, had Chloe pinned against the cinder block wall with his forearm across her collarbone. Her phone was on the floor in pieces. 6 students stood in a rough half-circle. 2 were filming. Not one had moved. Rex's growl started low in his chest, a sound that wasn't quite a warning and wasn't quite a command, the sound of a trained animal who understood exactly what was happening and was waiting, barely, for instruction. Daniel crossed the room in 4 steps, put himself between his daughter and Tyler Marsh, and said nothing at all for 3 full seconds. He let the silence do the work. Tyler looked at him with something that was not quite fear. It was more like the expression of someone who had been interrupted before and had always found a way to make the interruption regret itself. "You know who my father is?" Tyler said. Daniel got Chloe out of that building. In the truck, she didn't speak for 6 blocks. Rex pushed through the gap between the front seats from the back without being invited and rested his chin on her knee, and she put both hands in his fur and breathed. That night, after dinner she barely touched, Chloe set a composition notebook on the kitchen table between them. 47 pages, front and back, dates, times, names, locations, descriptions so precise they read like police reports because her mother had been a lawyer and had left behind books that Chloe had read and reread in the years since the funeral, not for comfort, but for instruction. 8 months of evidence, assembled alone by a 16-year-old girl who had already understood that no one was coming unless she made the case herself. Daniel looked at his daughter across that table and felt something break quietly inside his chest, not into pieces but open, like a door that should have been unlocked a long time ago. Principal Warren Blake's office smelled like furniture polish and self-preservation. The man was 58 years old, with the careful eyes of someone who had spent decades calculating what things cost before deciding whether to care about them. 3 photographs of Gregory Marsh hung on the wall, Marsh at the ribbon cutting for the new gymnasium, Marsh presenting an oversized check to the district, Marsh and Blake shaking hands in front of the science annex with matching smiles. Daniel placed Chloe's notebook on the desk without speaking. Blake did not open it. He talked instead about process, about the complexity of adolescent social dynamics, about the importance of hearing multiple perspectives. Daniel listened until Blake finished. Then he asked one question: how many complaints about Tyler Marsh have been filed in the last 3 years? Blake said that information was confidential. Daniel told him he would find out anyway and left. Gregory Marsh called that evening. His voice had the particular smoothness of someone who had been making problems disappear for so long that he had stopped thinking of it as anything but a reasonable service. He invited Daniel to his office. The room was on the 12th floor, with windows looking down over all of Harlow Creek. the way a man looks down at something he owns. Marsh poured whiskey. Daniel didn't touch his glass. Marsh talked about misunderstandings, about the pressures on young men, about fresh starts and new opportunities. Then he placed a check on the desk, $45,000, made out to a private educational foundation that would provide Chloe a scholarship to a better school, a school farther away, somewhere she could begin again. Daniel looked at the check for a long moment. Then Marsh said, "The Cedar Mill contract. I had that pulled. I can make it go the other way." Daniel understood then that none of this was reactive. He had been watched before he even knew there was something to watch. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with Rex at his feet and Chloe's notebook open in front of him, and he did what 10 years of SWAT training had taught him to do before any high-risk operation. He made a list of what he had, what he needed, and who he could trust. The next morning, he called Aaron Cole, his best friend from the unit, who was doing private security work in Columbus, and answered on the second ring with the particular alertness of someone who had spent too many years sleeping lightly to ever fully stop. Aaron arrived by noon in an unmarked car with 2 cases of audio equipment and the calm, unhurried competence of a man who did not panic because he had already run through every version of what could go wrong. He sat across from Daniel at the kitchen table, listened to everything without interrupting, and said, "You remember Dayton? You told me not to quit. I'm here." They reached Patricia Nguyen through a referral Aaron had kept in his back pocket for years, a 55-year-old attorney who had built her practice on cases that well-resourced defendants expected to bury. When Daniel laid out the facts, she listened without moving. "I know the Marsh family," she said. "I got close to them 6 years ago. Different family, different child, same pattern. Their lawyers made me sign an NDA to protect my client, who was terrified. I signed it." She was quiet for a moment. "I won't let it end there again." Rachel Kim ran an investigative podcast out of a converted garage in the warehouse district. No network, no corporate backing, 200,000 listeners who trusted her for exactly that reason. She had been circling the Marsh family's real estate practices for 8 months, pulling on threads that kept disappearing. Rex spent those first days differently than anyone else. Aaron worked with him in the evenings, reinforcing the alert behaviors from his K9 training. The low posture, the fixed stare, the growl that meant person nearby, unknown, watch. The dog seemed to understand that the work had changed. Patricia pulled the public financial records in 4 days. 6 families over 6 years had received payments from a private foundation connected to Gregory Marsh, totaling just over $180,000, disbursed as educational grants. Not one family had filed a follow-up complaint. Not one incident had resulted in disciplinary action against Tyler. Aaron identified Craig Hollis, the private investigator Marsh had hired, within 48 hours. Ex-cop, fired for evidence fabrication, now working exclusively for clients who needed problems managed quietly. But when Aaron reviewed the surveillance footage from the camera he had positioned outside Daniel's building, he found that Hollis was not watching Daniel alone. He was running simultaneous surveillance on Rachel Kim's studio and Patricia's office building. Marsh already knew about all of them. The Garrett family lived in a 2-story house on the east side with a porch light that stayed on late. Tom Garrett opened the door in work clothes, with the face of a man who had been waiting for someone to knock and dreading it in equal measure. His son Ethan, now 17, had been assaulted by Tyler in the locker room 2 years earlier. A broken arm, 2 surgeries, and an official report that called it a sports injury. They had accepted $35,000 and signed a non-disclosure agreement because a Marsh family attorney had made it very clear what would happen to Tom's construction business if they didn't. Daniel did not ask them to break the agreement. He asked only, if a court subpoenas your testimony, if someone else has already put the case together and just needs you to confirm what you know, will you do it? Tom looked at his wife. He looked at the staircase where, upstairs, Ethan was doing homework with the bedroom door closed, the way he always kept it closed now. "He still has nightmares," Tom said. "If it stops with some other kid, then yes." On the wall behind him, Daniel noticed a photograph. Ethan in a football jersey, grinning, arm around Tyler Marsh. Linda caught him looking. "They were best friends," she said quietly. "Tyler chose him on purpose." Marsh's response came in layers, the way a professional applies pressure, not all at once, which creates resistance, but gradually, which creates doubt. First came the anonymous posts on the Harlow Creek Community Forum. Vague references to a former officer with a documented discipline history. Questions about the mental stability of a single father still processing grief. The information was technically accurate and entirely dishonest. Daniel had been formally reprimanded once in his 10 years on the force, not for misconduct, but for refusing a breach order when his own intelligence suggested children were present in the target structure. He had been right. The reprimand existed anyway, and Marsh had found it, stripped it of context, and released it like a slow gas into the atmosphere of a small city where people talked. Then, on a Wednesday morning, Daniel walked out to find all 4 tires on his truck flattened. No note, no message. The point was the silence. The demonstration that they could reach him without leaving evidence. Rex had alerted at 2:30 that same morning, standing at the window with his ears forward and his body rigid, staring at the street below. Aaron had gone to the front entrance and scanned the street from the steps, but had not walked the full perimeter of the building. The truck was parked in the narrow side lot, and he had not gone around the corner. The next morning, reviewing the overnight footage, Aaron found footprints in the mud beside Daniel's truck and, at the edge of frame, the partial image of a face Daniel didn't recognize, wearing a Harlow Creek Police Department jacket. Chloe retreated further into herself. Maya, her only real friend, had stopped sitting with her at lunch, not out of cruelty, but out of fear because Maya's parents both worked for Marsh-connected companies and had told their daughter, gently but clearly, to stay away. Chloe called Daniel from the school bathroom one afternoon. Her voice was flat in the way that worried him far more than crying would have. "They're not even pretending I'm a person anymore, Dad," she said. "They look through me." Daniel held the phone and said nothing for a moment, because some things required silence before they required words. "I'm coming to get you," he said. "Stay where you are." She was waiting at the side entrance when he pulled up, backpack over one shoulder, Rex pressing against her leg before Daniel had fully stopped the truck. It was on the sidewalk outside the school that Daniel met Carol Dean. She had been Chloe's English teacher for 2 years, and she had the particular look of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally decided they cannot carry it alone anymore. She had filed 3 separate internal reports about Tyler Marsh's behavior over the past 2 years. All 3 had been marked as received and never acted upon. She had not signed any agreement, had not taken any money, and had spent those 2 years documenting in private what she could not say in public. She handed Daniel a USB drive on the sidewalk, with the matter-of-fact directness of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times and was done rehearsing. The drive contained internal email chains between Blake and Marsh's office showing deliberate suppression of complaints, edited meeting minutes, and a list of 7 other faculty members who had submitted reports that were quietly buried. That evening, Daniel sat in the kitchen long after Chloe had gone to bed. Rex was beside him, chin resting on Daniel's knee, dark eyes open. Daniel looked at the dog and thought about what his wife used to say about bearing witness, that seeing something clearly and refusing to look away was itself a form of courage. He opened his notebook and wrote, "The system didn't fail because there weren't enough good people. It failed because the good people were alone. When good people find each other, the system changes." Rex's tail moved once, slowly, against the floor. Patricia filed the civil complaint on a Thursday morning. The same afternoon, Rachel released the first episode of a 4-part series. No names, no accusations, only documented data. The number of bullying complaints filed at Harlow Creek High over the past 5 years, the percentage resolved with formal disciplinary action, the financial relationships between the school district's largest donors and its administrative leadership. By Friday evening, it had 60,000 downloads. By Monday, it had 400,000. Aaron had been running counter-surveillance on Craig Hollis for 2 weeks, patiently, the way Daniel had taught him to be patient. Not waiting for the right moment, but creating the conditions for the right moment to arrive. When Hollis made contact, it was unexpected and oddly businesslike. The contact came through a third party, a former colleague of Aaron's who called on a Tuesday evening to relay a message. Hollis wanted it understood that Marsh had not paid the second installment of his fee, that he had documentation of every task he had been assigned, including the surveillance of Rachel Kim and Patricia Nguyen, and that he was willing to provide that documentation in exchange for a written statement confirming his cooperation. He had not called Daniel directly. He had been careful enough not to do that. Daniel asked Aaron's colleague to pass one message back. He would refer the matter to his attorney. Detective Sam Ford had been watching the Marsh family's orbit for 4 years without enough to move on. He read Patricia's preliminary filing on a Wednesday and called Daniel directly. "I've been waiting for someone to put this together," he said. He reviewed the USB files from Ms. Dean, cross-referenced them with internal department records he had quietly been keeping, and identified the officer in Aaron's overnight footage without hesitation. Sergeant Ray Davis, his direct supervisor, who had personally redirected or closed 4 separate investigations touching the Marsh family since his promotion. Rex stayed close to Chloe through all of it, always within reach, always calm. The school board convened an emergency session on a Tuesday evening in the district administration building. Every seat was taken. Camera operators from 3 local stations stood along the back wall. Gregory Marsh arrived with 3 attorneys and the composed bearing of a man who had sat through difficult meetings before and understood that they could always be managed. Daniel arrived with Chloe on his left and Rex on her other side, registered as an emotional support animal. Paperwork in order, which Marsh's lead attorney immediately challenged and the board chair immediately denied. Rex lay down at Chloe's feet and rested his chin on her shoe and stayed there for the entire hearing. The Marsh legal team presented their counter-narrative midway through the session. A video, professionally edited, which showed Daniel entering the auxiliary gym aggressively, Rex's teeth visible, Tyler stepping back with his hands raised. Chloe's original crisis was not in the footage. When the video finished, the room was beginning to shift. Daniel could feel it, the way a room shifts when a skilled and well-resourced argument fills the available space. Then Maya stood up. She was in the 3rd row, beside her parents, and she stood up without warning anyone, her hands visibly trembling, her voice coming out high and then steadying itself. She said she had been recording Tyler's behavior for 3 weeks before the incident in the gym. She said she had been too afraid to give the footage to anyone. She said she had not deleted it. She handed her phone to Patricia. The footage played. It was irrefutable. When the room was quiet, Chloe stood and spoke without notes. She said that what Tyler had done to her body was not actually the thing she most needed people to understand. She said that what she needed them to understand was what happened in the spaces between the violence. The teachers who looked past her, the counselor who suggested she adjust her behavior, the principal who already had a file prepared to discredit her. When you go silent in front of injustice, she said, you are not staying neutral. You are telling the person causing harm that what they are doing is acceptable. Respect for human beings is not a lesson only for children. It is something the adults in this room forgot. Eleanor Marsh stood up from the back row. She had arrived after the session began, slipping into the last seat by the side door while attention was fixed on the screen, her face turned down, and no one who recognized her had thought to say anything or had chosen not to. Eleanor Marsh said 4 sentences. She said she had known. She said she had known longer than anyone in that room. She said she would testify for the plaintiffs. Then she looked at her husband, and the look between them contained 23 years of marriage and every choice she had made inside it, and she sat back down. The legal outcomes moved quickly after that. Tyler was adjudicated on 4 counts of assault and placed in a structured residential program with mandatory psychiatric treatment. The forensic evaluation revealed something that landed in Daniel's chest with particular weight. Tyler had been diagnosed with a conduct disorder at age 12, assessed as needing intensive intervention. Gregory Marsh had used his resources and his connections to have that record removed from the school system and the family's insurance history. But the original clinic that issued the diagnosis had retained its own copy in an off-site archive, untouched, because no one had thought to ask a private psychiatric facility that had since changed ownership and names. Gregory Marsh himself was indicted on charges of bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to conceal the abuse of minors. Principal Blake lost his license. Sergeant Davis was suspended pending investigation. Carol Dean was appointed interim principal. Her first official act was the creation of an independent student advocacy board that reported outside the administrative chain of command. 4 months later, a letter arrived with no return address. Daniel recognized the handwriting as Eleanor Marsh's before he opened it. She wrote that she had spent her son's entire childhood believing that love meant giving him everything he wanted and protecting him from every consequence. She wrote that she had watched him become someone she didn't recognize and had told herself it was a phase. She wrote, real love means being willing to say you are wrong and holding that line even when it costs you something. I didn't do that. And children I will never meet paid the price I should have paid. Daniel read the letter out loud to Chloe on the front porch. Rex was between them, tail moving in a slow arc across the floorboards. Chloe listened to the whole thing, then was quiet for a moment. Do I have to forgive her? Daniel thought about that. No, he said. But you can choose not to let the weight of it be yours to carry. Chloe nodded slowly. She had a legal pad on her knee with the title of her state journalism competition essay written at the top. What happens when adults go quiet? Rex put his chin on her foot. The evening came in around them, soft and unhurried, carrying the particular quality of peace that belongs only to people who have earned it. If this story moved you, drop a comment and tell us which moment hit you hardest and where in the world you are watching from. Subscribe so you never miss the next one.
Clay never wanted to see what her daughter became, but she left something behind more powerful than her prison. She left a mentor. Write it down. Let it be basic. Because the truth doesn't protect itself, you have to build a house for it. Chloe was sitting alone and systematically broken down by someone with money and power on her side. The school looked away. The principal covered it up. The system framed her completely. But she doesn't fall apart. She opened a notebook, 47 page, 14 months, every day, every word, every witness. Not because anyone told her to, because her mother once told her that silence it was our coward. That notebook doesn't just save Chloe, it brought down a core principle, expose a people, police, serene, and dismantle a wealthy family. This is long cover up. Here was this story, the church, document everything, speak clearly, don't accept silent answer, and if you are a parent, teach your children that boy matter, that experience is real, that when the world tries to make them disappear, the most radical thing they can do is write it down and refuse to stop. The truth doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be peeled carefully, one honest word at a time. That is the most dangerous thing you can give a child and the most powerful.